call to order the Williamsport City Council meeting. It's Thursday, February 6th, 2020, 7:30 p.m., and we are in City Hall Council chambers tonight. Please rise for the invocation by Councilman Palizzi and remain standing for the flag salute.
Father, thank you for every seat that has been filled here today. For each mind and heart that fills the presence of this room, we thank you. You truly know what we are setting out to accomplish today. We have an idea, a vision, hints, and daily instructions. We have talents, abilities, and time to work. However, only you can see in perfect detail the end of every beginning. Strengthen our confidence in who you have made us to be. Set us free from comparison in order to work together efficiently. Bless this meeting and all present, as well as the lives of those we will encounter. Ready us to make every moment count. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Councilman Palizzi. We'll move to item 3, approval of City Council minutes dated 1/23/20. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second. Motion and a second. Questions or corrections from council? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank?
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Palizzi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move to item 4, a limited courtesy of the floor, and we've had one request tonight. Mr. Bruce Huffman.
Bruce Huffman, 1000 Cherry Street, in the city. Good evening, members of council. My comments were originally to pertain to what was item 17, now 18, announcements, but will now also include item 7, resolution to temporarily relocate all public meetings. On Tuesday, January 28, 2020, a press release printed on City Council letterhead was issued by Williamsport City Council stating in part, effective Thursday, February 20th, 2020, with the regularly scheduled City Council meeting, the City of Williamsport will hold all public meetings at Trade and Transit 2 Center, 144 West 3rd Street in Williamsport. I would like to take issue with the manner in which City Council acted to move all City Council and Council Committee meetings from City Hall to the Trade and Transit 2 building. Let me make clear that this is not a commentary on whether or not relocating meetings is appropriate. My concerns focus on how, when, and where the actual decision to move them was made, and whether that process conformed to the city's administrative code, the state's optional third-class city charter law, and the Sunshine Act. Article 4, Section 408 of the optional charter law states, on the first Monday of January following the regular municipal election, the members of council shall assemble at the usual place of meeting and organize and elect a president of the council from among its members. While the above section deals specifically with the first organizational meeting of council, it is actually Article 6, Section 606 of the optional charter law that pertains to the majority of the regular meetings of council. Quote, the council shall by ordinance or resolution designate the time of holding regular meetings, which shall be at least monthly. Section 607 continues, each ordinance or resolution shall be introduced in a written or typewritten form and shall be read and considered as provided by general law. The vote upon every motion, resolution, or ordinance shall be taken by roll call, and the yeas and nays shall be entered on the minutes. The codified ordinances of the City of Williamsport contains further reference to the above-mentioned sections. Title III Legislative, Article 111, Council, Section 11101, states, regular meetings of council shall be held every Thursday throughout the year and shall begin at 7:30 p.m. prevailing time unless otherwise noted. All meetings will be held in City Council chambers in City Hall. Meetings may occasionally be held at other locations with the approval of the majority of council. As with all meetings, they must be properly advertised. It continues, all regular and special meetings of council shall be open to the public. The proceedings of council shall be governed by rules and regulations as fixed by resolution of council. At the council meeting of January 23rd, 2020, there was, to my knowledge, no public discussion of council moving the regular city council meetings from City Hall to the Trade and Transit Building. While it wasn't announced that an executive session would follow for the purpose of personnel matters and litigation, a discussion of moving the location of meetings seems to fall outside of the 5 specifically listed reasons for having an executive session. Further, Section 111.01 states, in an executive session, under no circumstances should the deliberations ever lead to a vote by the members, and closed work sessions by City Council or any of its committees may be held to gather information only and shall conform strictly to the Sunshine Act. There should never be any deliberations on any issue that may or may not lead to a decision, either at that meeting or in the future. There were no public meetings of council between January 24th and January 28th, 2020. Since no roll call vote was taken in public, how do the taxpayers and citizens of Williamsport know for certain that a majority of city council members supported the move, or if there was any opposition? Item 7 on tonight's agenda listed was not on the original agenda as posted on the city's website last Friday, January 31st. It appears to be an afterthought, but one with a foregone conclusion. Unlike every other ordinance and resolution on tonight's agenda, this resolution was not on any council committee agenda, nor was it reviewed or discussed by any committee of council that met in public session on Tuesday, February 4th, the normal setting in which items are reviewed and formally recommended to the full body of council. I would like to remind council of the following short statement taken from council's procedural rules and regulations. Rule 10, introduction of passage of ordinance and resolutions. Every legislative act of council shall be by resolution or ordinance. Was council not acting when it changed the location of its meetings? But how, when, and where was the action done? It certainly was not done in a public meeting. I sincerely hope that after item 7 is moved, seconded, and opened up to discussion, that every council member will state how, when, and where the action that led to the press release occurred. The late addition to tonight's agenda of item 7, at the very least, gives the appearance of trying to legitimize a process that was improperly undertaken.
We're going to move item 15, lot consolidation, up next.
Good evening, President Allison and members of council.
Good evening.
What I present to you tonight is a lot consolidation from Young Men's Republican Club, located on Washington Boulevard. What they are proposing to do is consolidate 4 parcels that they currently own, which houses the building that they utilize as well as parking. In addition to consolidating those, there is no plan for development. It's merely a zoning and cleanup. Again, when we have zoning, one of the concepts of it is you don't build over lot lines. This is something that has been that way. So they're requesting to consolidate them as one tax parcel. I did reach out and talk to Nick Grimes as well as the assessor's office. Is basically their value as far as with the lot consolidation, how does that affect the city? And what they're saying is there is a little bit difference of an assessment, not much, but it's based off of land value. I know council and many other members of the city have concerns as far as the lot consolidation process and losing parcels. Here's one instance of where what happens. Just like what we did with down on Basin Street when the college did their program, they had probably 20 parcels. In order to develop it or to build it, it's a requirement to consolidate this. So yes, we are in a way losing some parcels. This is one of the reasons that we're losing them. So instead of 4, it's 1. It's just merely zoning is requiring them to consolidate them as part of the process of zoning. And at this point, again, it was reviewed by Planning Commission as well as County, and both of them gave positive recommendation for your approval.
Thank you, Mr. Nar. Is there a motion on this?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Discussion? Questions?
That's what we like
Hearing
to
none?
hear.
That was easy. Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, motion passes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank, and thank you, Mr. Nar. We're going to also move up now, item 11, the resolution authorizing the hiring of a police officer. Mrs. Frank in short form, please.
Resolution authorizing the Williamsport Bureau of Police to hire 1 police officer.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Welcome, Chief Hagan.
Good evening, members of council, President Allison, members of the city administration. It is my pleasure to come before you tonight on the resolution. As you know, last year, with problems with our civil service list and the number of people that were on it, we asked for your help and your guidance on changing our hiring practices to include, once again, sending cadets to the police academy. That change, with your help, enables us to even stand here tonight and talk about this incredible guy here. Charles Schwab is 31. He's originally from Marietta, Ohio. He is an Army veteran, an airborne infantryman. He is a veteran of the U.S. Army from Germany and also in Afghanistan. He has degrees, an associate degree in criminal justice, and he has a bachelor's degree in political science. He has worked in finance, and he now works with the Lycoming County Sheriff's Office as a deputy. He wants to come work here. Charles is 31 and has a passion for law enforcement. He is in need of going to the academy, which is why I said, without that change last year, we wouldn't even be able to talk about Charles Schwab working here. So it was a great thing that we did, and we're lucky to have him. We did a full-scale background, and that was done by Agent Brittany Alexander. He passed that background investigation with flying colors, and she recommended him. I reviewed it. I recommended it. The mayor has approved it, and I bring him before you tonight for approval to be hired. The plan is to send him to the Lackawanna College Act 120 Police Academy starting on March 23rd. His approval here tonight gives us time then to do the necessary paperwork and academy testing and fitting for academy uniforms and all the things that you have to do before you go to a police academy before March 23rd. So his first day of employment would be on March 23rd. And so we will not be doing a swearing in here tonight with this, but he is first on the civil service list with the 10-point military preference. He has over 104. It's an incredible score to have, and so we look forward to him coming to work for us, and he will be badge number 28. I look forward to any of your questions.
This was reviewed in public safety.
Safety. Yes, when the chief brought this to us and we looked at Charles Schwab's background, really impressed. We're really excited to have him on our force. The score, like you said, incredible score. You also are familiar with the city since you are a sheriff here already, so you know the surroundings. You are familiar with the workings of the city. You're going to be a tremendous asset, and this was passed on to the full body of council with a positive recommendation, and we thank you very much for coming to us, and also your family.
Oh, I'm sorry. Amber Hagenstaller is Mr. Schwab's fiance. She's a teacher in our school district, and we're very lucky to have her as well. As many of you know, there's nothing quite like being a law enforcement spouse. The goodbye that you say each day is different in our line of work than in most, and it's a serious undertaking to become a family member of ours. So we welcome her, and we're happy to have both of them here.
That's why you always want to say thank you to the family, because it is, you work together. You really do, mentally
Yes,
and
ma'am.
physically.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
do.
Thank you, Chief. Other comments or questions? Well, we certainly are glad, more than glad. We're thrilled to have you aboard. Traditionally, we've referenced our model is to protect and serve the public, and you seem very well suited for that, and I think probably the most qualified, not that we haven't had good qualified candidates, but your credentials are exceptional, and we're thankful that you've come to serve the city of Williamsport, and we're here to support the police department in whatever way we can. And thank you, Chief, for keeping a good, fresh, full list. That's been an important thing to keep our force fully staffed, and we appreciate that as well. Hearing no other comments or questions, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder? Yes. Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes. Okay, we'll move back to our regular agenda, and we'll move to item 5, appointments and reappointments.
Awesome. Quick question. I, at least for one, will be abstaining from a couple of these. Do I need to do that before the motion and second or before discussion?
Well, we're not, you're not taking them all together? are you?
No, I don't think traditionally we take each commission.
Mr. Yoder, are the ones that you're abstaining from under one of the, or both of them under one?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that if you take each one separately, then you would just abstain from the vote on the one that has the two that you have
Just
accomplished.
abstain from the vote?
Just from that one. That's correct.
Thank you.
Mayor Slaughter, welcome.
Good evening, President Allison, Vice President Mealy, and members of council, administration. Before you, first, we'll start with the Brandon Park Commission and Shade Tree Commission. We have 2 appointments there. Debbie Allison, who is a longtime member of the Brandon Park Commission for reappointment, and Laura Krieger, who is a new member, new appointment, but is very energetic and is to give back to the community, and we look forward to her becoming part of the Brandon Park and Shade Tree Commission as well. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. They were interviewed in Public Works.
Public Works. Debbie Allison, for some strange reason, I think we all know Debbie. Debbie has done, Allison has done a remarkable job on the Brandon Park Commission and Shade Tree Commission. She loves what she's doing, and we're very happy that she's agreed to come back on this commission. Laura Krieger, a joy to meet her, and really pleased that we have new blood coming in. She said she already has some ideas and everything, and I know we have other people that want to put some more fresh input into the Brandon Park and Shade Tree Commission. So we are really excited about having Laura a part of our commissions at this point, and to work with Debbie Allison. Great people, great people.
Agreed.
We don't take votes on that.
Right.
Any other comments from council members? Mr. White, do I need to abstain on this? Yeah, so we should take these two separately. It does pay a lot, this commission, but. So we need we'll do Debbie Allison first. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Mrs. Frank on the vote, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
She had 4 votes.
I
on
get
it.
it's pretty.
I abstained.
She has enough. Mr. Allison?
I abstain, and motion passes 5-0-1. And is there a motion on Laura Krieger?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other discussion on that? Hearing none. Mrs. Frank? on the
Mr.
motion?
Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move to the Williamsport Water Authority.
As a quick note, we're also reappointing to the Sanitary Authority, correct? Should we make that part of the record?
Since it's the Water Authority and Sanitary Authority is separate, we should make it clear that these appointments are for both of those authorities.
Okay. Should we amend this?
I don't think anyone made a motion yet, so
Okay.
whoever makes the motion, just make it as appointment to the Water Authority and the Sanitary Authority.
Okay.
I'll move that we reappoint William Erdl and Greg Zeitler to the Williamsport Water and Sanitary Authorities.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, okay. Motion and a second. Discussion on that. Yes.
Yeah, well, actually, Derek, do you have anything to say about it first?
Just that. It's William Bill Erdl and Greg Zeitler, both longstanding members of the Water and Sanitary Authority for reappointment. Obviously, they both bring significant experience and knowledge to the table, and look forward to their reappointment.
And to that, I would just add that several of us were fortunate to speak with both Mr. Erdl and Mr. Zeitler in an ad hoc meeting convened for the purpose on Monday. And we are, all right, fine. And we're exceptionally fortunate, frankly, that these gentlemen are interested in being reappointed to the Water Authority. As we know, we'll be appointing a handful of new members here over the next couple of months, and as they demonstrated in their interviews, both men have a very strong knowledge of what's been happening in our Water Authority for better than the past 10 years, and that sort of experience and that depth of knowledge in our existing authority members will be invaluable when we have new authority members who we need to kind of bring up to speed. So I would say also fascinating was the fact that they seem to have been involved in sort of different elements of the water authority, so that while they have a lot of overlapping knowledge, they also have, Greg has a lot of in-depth knowledge about the stormwater authority plans that we've been working on for the last several years. Bill has a lot more in-depth knowledge about the operations of the water and sewer authorities. So they really dovetail nicely. We're lucky there.
Second that. Anybody else who was at the ad hoc interview care to? I think Liz gave a good summation.
I just think we're thrilled, that these two men, again, are coming back
Right.
to work on these authorities. Their knowledge is invaluable. As we've talked, it takes a long time to actually understand the workings of the authority. And so we're really lucky to have these two men come back.
Agreed. Hearing no other comments or questions, Mrs. Frank, on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Abstain.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Abstain.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Motion passes 4-0 and 2 abstentions. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move to the Redevelopment Authority.
Yep, so the last item here for reappointment to the Redevelopment Authority is Mayor Phil Preziosi, who I think pretty much everyone is familiar with. He has served the city for many, many, many years in various capacities. Jennifer Matz and James Graham, who have also been members of the Redevelopment Authority and are looking to be reappointed as well.
Thank you, Mayor Slaughter. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. And
This came before finance.
they were interviewed in
Finance.
Finance.
Yeah, so these three folks all came to the Finance Committee, which is some pretty remarkable, which is a pretty remarkable accomplishment in itself. These are 3 of 5 appointments we have to the Redevelopment Authority, and I believe that actually all of them are currently serving expired terms.
Correct.
So we're taking care of, we'll be taking care of the other 2 here at some point in the next couple of weeks. All of these folks, I believe, Mr. Preziosi has served on the Redevelopment Authority since 1996, he told me. And Mr. Graham for 15 years. Ms. Matz didn't tell us exactly how long she'd been on, but obviously a substantial period of time. They have all been, as you'll see from your notes, serving for anywhere between the last 3 and 5 years without being reappointed to the board. That said, there hasn't been a whole lot of work for the board to do in the last couple of years. We did have a nice discussion about some of the work that had been undertaken by the Redevelopment Authority. I would broaden this question out to both the full body of council and members of the administration. I think that there probably is important work that we as a city can utilize the Redevelopment Authority for, and we have not been making a whole lot of use of the possibilities in that authority in the last several years. So it behooves us, as we think about potential for redevelopment in the city moving forward, to consider that arm as a tool. The members generally agree with that assessment. They said that they thought that it was an important tool in the arsenal of the city. The one other discussion that we had, and you'll pardon me, because I actually meant to ask Janice to amend the record between finance and now, and then I forgot. It was my suggestion, we have 5 members on the Redevelopment Authority Board, and 3 of them on this agenda are being reappointed to terms that expire in the same year. I don't believe that was the intent of the original ordinance. So I had suggested, Ms. Matz actually is serving a term that expired in 2015. So she would have been reappointed, and her term would have expired at the beginning of 2020 anyway. So we're effectively reappointing her for a term that starts in 2020. I would suggest that we make the concluding date of her term on the record 1/7/2025. Likewise, I would suggest that we appoint Mr. Graham to a 4-year term that ends in 2022. And then I think with one more adjustment to a reappointment for Ms. Nayo Brown, we'll have finalized, we'll have fixed, we'll have everyone so that each appointee rotates out on an annual basis
Right.
instead of having several expire at one time. It's a minor risk, as we can see, given the length of service that these folks have demonstrated, but if we were to lose 3 members all at one go in 1 year, it would be a significant difficulty to running the redevelopment authority, so I think we want to do everything we can to protect against that. And that's everything. Okay.
Are you making a motion to amend them?
Austin, can I make a motion to amend
Well,
the
if-
dates?
If the ordinance provides that they're 5-year terms, then we wouldn't, I don't.
We can't appoint 2 of 4. So
I
how do
think
we realign what clearly got screwed up at some point?
I think that the best we could do is appoint based on what terms are expired now moving forward. And
Okay.
then it's something that we'll have to deal with legislatively.
Okay, got it. So Ms. Matz would be appointed to a term expiring 2025, because her original expired term was 2015.
If
And then
it-
the other
since it would
two,
have been, you know, since an entire term has passed, you know,
Right.
you would, whether you're appointing her to fill that one and the one moving forward, or just filling the one moving forward, it doesn't make a difference. I think it makes sense, I think it made sense just to have her appointed to the 2020,
okay,
2025.
got it. So 2 then expiring in 2023 and 1 in 2025, and we'll have to explore legislative alternatives for, okay.
Janice, Ms. Frank was just telling me about the other ones, and
Okay.
because she's
We
the
did.
person who
Yeah,
keeps track of all.
we do have 3 who will be expiring in 2023 then, so we probably should look at some sort of legislative alternative. It's not imperative, it's something that actually has to go through something by ordinance. But we happen to have a lot of commissions and appointments that are kind of buggered up like that, and it might be wise for us to try and sort that out the next couple of years. Anyway, then my amendment would simply be to amend Ms. Matz's term of service to a term commencing 1/7/20 and ending 1/7/25.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the amendment? Mrs. Frank on the amendment, please.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes on the amendment. So now we're back to the reappointments. Is there any more discussion on that? We have a motion and a second on that, so Mrs. Frank on the reappointments of these 3 individuals.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Are we doing all 3 of these? We're doing all 3. We don't have to do, even though we're doing a different time on Jennifer Matz?
Yeah.
I think we're okay to do all 3.
Fine, okay. Yes.
Ms. Mealy,
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes. And that- You've referenced it, Councilwoman Mealy, about these reappointments. We're going to see a lot of these coming forward in the next month or so, and the mayor has been working hard to fill there's a lot of vacancies, and there's a lot whose terms have expired and been allowed to continue. We've been pushing for this housekeeping for a while, and without a lot of traction, but now we have traction. So it does sound confusing at times, but there's a little bit of a mess that's being cleaned up.
This is probably also an opportune moment to mention that the city does have boards and commissions that are in need of new
Yes.
membership. And so if there's anyone out there in the viewing public who is interested in serving on a city board or commission, submitting your resume to the city clerk would probably be an excellent first step
Yes.
to beginning your service here with the city of Williamsport. And stepping into the pipeline.
I think one that particularly needs one is the Harbor Board. If there's anyone interested in serving on the Historical Architectural Review Board, it's an important component of our taking care of our historical district of the city. And we they get a lot of action. They meet once a month, I believe, on a Tuesday.
In
Yes.
fact, we'll be approving some of their certificates of appropriateness later tonight.
So if you're interested in that kind of thing, it'd be a perfect place for someone to step up and volunteer and get a good education about historical things. Okay, we'll move to item 6, ordinance amending Article 117. Would you read that in short form, please, Mrs. Frank?
An ordinance amending Article 117, General Fee Schedule.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Mr. Girardi, welcome.
Good evening, President Allison and members of council. What you have before you is an ordinance amending our general fee schedule. This year, every time around this year, for the last probably 10 years, we come through with changing the fee schedules. We don't change them all. We change ones that we feel are pertinent because they haven't been changed in maybe 4 or 5 years, but we try to keep them updated because it offsets the cost of my department. So I can go through the ones that we changed, and then if there's any questions, you can ask me. Okay? On the first page, we changed on the building permit fees, anything over $10,000, an additional fee of $15 will be charged for each additional $1,000 of construction costs. Last year, that was $14. On the next page, under planning and zoning fees, zoning maps were $50. Zoning books are $100. On the last year's fee schedule, those same fees were, the zoning map was $20 and the zoning book was $60. The reason why we jumped them up was because that's all online now. You can go on and print out what you want, okay? So it's really, we offer it because there are some people who still want it. It's more of a nuisance for us because we have to run the OSs and get each one enlarged because we don't want to keep 60 copies around. If we change it, now all of a sudden those copies are bad. So that's the reason why we jumped the fees up there. Under zoning permits used without a building permit, they were $50, we jumped them to $60. Stormwater review was $175, we bumped that to $200. The next page, driveway permits went from $50 to $60. PP&L poles and guide wires, they went from $15 to $20 a pole. Pyrotechnics and bonfires went from $100 each to jumped up to $200 each. And the reason why I did go through this with our fire chief, we have to have a truck and 2 men out every time they do pyrotechnics, so they have to sit there and watch until it's over with. So that's a lot of responsibility. Plus, we got the big tanker out that's taken away from the firehouse, and we have 2 officers out there. So we felt it's better to update the fee a little bit more to try to recoup some of that cost. We also changed the special event permits, which consist of multiple events throughout the year. We never had a category for that. First Fridays is one, First Saturdays, the farmer's market. They do more than one event a year. They may do, well, farmer's market's every Saturday. So the way it's written, we should be charging them $50 every Saturday for that permit. And the same thing with the First Fridays and First Saturdays. They do it every once a month for 8 months. So we made it so that if you're having 6 or more events a year that are the same similar event in a calendar year, you're required to pay $250 and you're good then for that whole entire year. Food vendors, $50 from $40. That hasn't been changed since I've been here in 12 years. Mobile food trucks, I believe, went from $200 to $250. Peddler's license was $15. It's now $30. There's a lot more involved. We did revise the ordinance last year to update it. There's a lot of fingerprinting, a lot of background checks and so forth that we have to recoup. And then the last one was rental property inspections. What you have on this is, for 12 years since we've been doing this cycle, it's been, well, not 12, we pushed it, I think, in about 4 years after I got here. About 8 years ago, we charged a fee, okay? Everybody's been through that cycle now at least one time, okay? Which is roughly 12 years because we have X amount of cycles. So this year would be the best year to increase it to $10 per building instead of $75 per building, because if we don't do it this year, then basically the way the cycle works, there's a group that's going to pay $75. Next time we raise it, it'll go to $85. So it's really the right time to do it if we're going to change that fee. And that's all I have. If you have any questions of me, I'm more than happy to try to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Girardi. This was reviewed in finance?
And Finance passed it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. We had a small amount of discussion regarding, well, A, whether other municipal and state entities are required to comply with our permitting schedule, and Joe said it is the opinion of our legal counsel that they are. That is to say, we have some large street developments that are going to be going on here that are PennDOT projects. And obviously, it would be helpful if we were to see some level of zoning and permitting fees from that, as well as the ability to approve those projects before they're constructed. I wanted to underline what Mr. Girardi said earlier, which is that we have a pretty high fee for printing both a zoning map and a zoning book for consumers, but that is because that information is available online and can be printed by anyone from our website or the codified ordinances for free, or for the cost of using your printer. So if anyone in the community feels that they would like copies, that's the easiest way to do it. Under stormwater review, we had some discussion about how many of these items we see a year. We see about 20 stormwater review items per year, and they are reviewed in-house by Mr. Narr, but they also, at this point, need an engineer's stamp, so they go to, while we're sort of sorting out our engineering coverage, these items go to Larson Design, and the fee merely for the engineering stamp is $125, which gives you some idea of whether or not we're truly covering our cost with the $200 fee, which we simply observed was a good reason to try and resolve our engineering situation sooner rather than later, so that we have that fee limited, or we have it in-house. Once again, the same note with the pyrotechnics permit and the bonfire permit, that $200 does not cover the city's cost by any stretch of the imagination. But just, I think, a note perhaps for the benefit of the public when we have what seems like an outrageous fee for some sort of permit, that by and large, those fees don't even cover the cost to the city to issue that permit and the number of departments it has to go through. And I'm just...
Could I ask on that, what constitutes a bonfire?
I'll refer to Chief Heckman on that, but bonfires, if you're having a large crowd assembling and you have a large pit where you have a fire and you're doing it for nighttime, for entertainment, might be a band or something like that. Am I correct, Chief?
I don't think it's really pointed out in the IFC as much as it is. It's a special event.
Right.
Takes it beyond the rims of our ordinance we have right now for permitted outdoor recreational fires. It's in attendance, and there's a attendance group around it. There's only 2 or 3 groups that really exercise it a year.
Yeah,
So
easy to identify then.
yeah, we've had people at home attempt to replicate bonfires in the fire pits, and we enforce that. But yeah, it's mostly for community civil events.
Right. Thank you.
And I believe that was everything. As I said, finance forwarded to the full body of council with a positive
Oh, okay,
recommendation.
great. Comments or questions? Mr. Mackey?
I wasn't at finance this week, so if this was discussed, I apologize. So if these 2 permits, pyrotechnics, bonfire, don't even come close to covering our costs, was there any discussion about making them higher?
There actually was not. I think we try to keep them.
No.
The part of the question with any of these things is that obviously you're not trying to inhibit the ability of someone in the community to have an event like this by making the fee so astronomical that you can't, that it's no longer palatable to do something, but it is kind of an attempt to cover our costs. So I think there's always a little bit of an administrative balancing act.
And if I'm correct on the pyrotechnics, technically Bowman Field has a lot of them, and 4th of July has a lot of them. I mean, has one a year. Other than that, Chief, I don't think there's really a lot of and Penn College, but they're all entities associated with the city, so we're just trying to recoup our cost on those, and that's why I think it's not so high of a fee. We don't have a lot of them out there, people firing off fire, unless 4th of July. Other than that,
We're not talking about the amateur pyrotechnic experts here? Okay.
I think a family member of mine might have gotten busted for an unauthorized pyrotechnics event one time. We don't do that anymore. But to my way of thinking, John, it's a worthy area to explore. But I do think that we always want to bear in mind that we don't want to discourage civic events in the city, but we also want to try and make certain that that the city's not covering a huge cost related to those events on especially if it's a once a week sort of event or something like that. So.
No other questions or comments? Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Girardi. We'll move to item 7, resolution to temporarily relocate all public meetings. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
Resolution to temporarily relocate public meetings.
Is there a motion?
So move.
Second?
Motion in the council, and a second. I'm going to initially address this, since this is council-initiated resolution. There's not, let me put it this way. There are legal associations right now between our solicitor and other legal counsel for the SIL and the DAP that we are engaged with, and I think that's been very public. Everybody knows about that. We're also in negotiations with the Department of Justice. They've been on site already. That's moving along, and that process is underway. There's a level of constraint about what any of us as city council people can or can't say. I understand there's, in the public and in social media, there are a lot of comments made and suppositions, thoughts and points of view on varying sides. We will never comment or engage in any of those, nor will we engage with anyone. We're in a position now where our attorney, our solicitors are engaging with other legal counsel. And it's just like any other legal matter. It reaches a different level. It takes on a different persona and has different requirements specific to itself. So in that respect, there are things we can and can't say about decisions and thoughts. As far as the questions that were brought up earlier, I think there's been a very public discussion about where we're going to hold our council meetings. It's happened organically, but I think everybody in Williamsport is aware of what's going on, and what the options and ramifications are. And again, I will not speak, nor will anyone else on council, as to any of those specifics, because it's not prudent to do so. I will say this. We anticipated, as council members, that an item would be brought forth. And in discussion with our solicitor and advice from our solicitor, we released we had a press release indicating our intentions, partly to notify the public so they would have as much time as possible to react to the moving of our city council meetings in public meetings to Trade and Transit 2 Center, which in itself is not just an easy thing as saying, well, we're all going to move there and hold the meetings. There are a lot of logistical things that are being taken care of and have to be taken care of, and transfers of information and those kinds of things. But we wanted to give notice to the public that it was happening. And the vote is being taken tonight to ratify the decision. I really think that the spirit of the law that talks about city council meetings and making them public and making the dates public and making the location public is really the issue here. And I believe we've gone by the spirit of the law. The letter of the law addresses, to my point of view, I think it addresses the need to make the decision public. I think everyone understands the ramifications behind that decision. And we felt it prudent, and with advice from our solicitor, released notification to the public ahead of time. And that's all I have to say about that. So we do have a motion in a second. Yeah, there are some things, I was going to address those later, but we might as well do it now.
Either way, I just wanted
Yeah,
to make it.
yeah.
make sure it was out there.
These are logistical things. This will temporarily, as long as we're there, at least in the beginning, will end live TV broadcasts. It's not economically feasible to, I don't even know if it would be possible to shift all the equipment there. There's more than meets the eye than this camera. There's a lot of backup technology in another room that supports all of this. So we will have access to live streaming of the council meetings, though. So people can still watch city council. There won't be two different camera angles. It'll be a fixed, broad view, but
We won't all be photoshopped to look better
yeah,
than we
yeah.
do.
For those who would like to watch at home, they'll still be able to. We're working out some things with the sound and the microphones, and as we go along through the process and have more meetings, we may change things around. We have an idea how to start things, and we have a setup we're going to go with. If something else might work better, we'll change it. But everything's going to be public. Everyone can access the third floor of the Trade and Transit 2. Let me read it out of the resolution. We will be meeting at Trade and Transit Center 2, third floor, 144 West 3rd Street in Williamsport. And that's the newest transit center that was built. We're ready to go. We're going to have everything transferred. We're going to make it as smooth a transition as possible. Having said that, I think we'll have the vote, Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes. Ms. Mealy.
As long as we're on the topic of live streaming city council meetings, Mr. Cooley, could you help me remember exactly how one goes about that? Do we have a YouTube channel? Can it be directly accessed through our website? Okay, so just in case those at home can't hear what Mr. Cooley's saying from back there, there will be either a link from our website to live stream council meetings, or the council meetings will be live streamed on the website. So anyone who's looking to replace their biweekly viewing of Williamsport City Council's scintillating meetings can do so via the city's website. Okay?
And in the interest of transparency, what is the cost going to be to doing that, Mr. Cooley? So city taxpayers know the cost is going to be $100 a month. So
take advantage.
Yeah. So it's very economical to do it that way. Okay, we'll move to item 8. Resolution authorizing the extension of legal services. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
Resolution authorizing the extension of legal services agreements on a month-to-month basis.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion and a second. Welcome, Mr. Pavlik.
Good evening, President Allison, Vice President Mealy, and members of council. Before you is a resolution to approve a month-to-month extension for legal service agreements with Casale and Bonner and the McCormick Law Firm. With the extension of both agreements, with the expiration of both agreements in December and the current administration's desire to award all professional service agreements through an open and competitive selection process, the administration believes that this resolution is the best interest of the city until the selection process is complete. This resolution will extend the agreements approved in January 2019 on a month-to-month basis under the terms and costs previously approved and attached to the resolution. Mayor Slaughter has contacted the current solicitors regarding this resolution, and both have agreed to the extension until the selection process is completed. Following discussions with the Finance Committee on Tuesday, this resolution was forwarded to the full body of council.
Thank you, Mr. Pavlik. This was reviewed in Finance.
And forwarded from the full body or from Finance with a positive recommendation. I believe the approximate timeline that we're looking for the RFP process for law firm selection, we're expecting to have new agreements in hand by sometime around the final meeting in March or the beginning of April, I think. But obviously, there's most of our discussion revolved around the multiple variables at work here. The RFP, which I have actually not personally seen, and I wouldn't mind seeing it, Joe, if you wouldn't mind sending it our way. Sure. For legal services, addressed a handful of different things, including that a firm could bid on any particular service or any or all of them. Mm-hmm. That is to say, this selection process through the selection process, we might wind up with 2 law firms, with 3 law firms, unlikely that we would wind up with simply 1. But there are a lot of sort of balls in the air. There's the obvious observation that we made that the city has received, has been the beneficiary of some relatively inexpensive legal counsel for the last several years, and we're hoping that will continue under this new arrangement. But there is always a possibility that the responses to the RFPs will come in far higher than we can afford to budget this year, and we'll have to have a look at that as well. So, there, as I said, there are a number of variables, but the approval on the table here is basically our existing firms will continue their services at a prorated monthly amount of their annual contract until such a time as we've concluded the RFP process, whenever that might be. And presumably, if we conclude the RFP process without selecting new legal counsel, we would then be seeing agreements to extend the existing contracts through the remainder of the calendar year. I would assume that would be if that were to be the outcome for some reason.
We would just continue the existing agreements until new agreements
That's
could
true,
be.
yeah, we're not losing anything. But yeah, anyway, we are, I think, we did not discuss this in the finance meeting, but at least I am grateful to our existing legal team and both the firms that we work with, that they are willing to service the city on a month-to-month basis with, at the same contractual amount as we have budgeted. That's an exceptionally generous accommodation, and it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you. That said, we also hope they'll bid on the on the RFP when it comes calling. I believe that Mr. Pavlak said that there would be a team assembled by the administration that likely would perhaps include a member of council as well. So, so we will have some participation in this process moving forward. The only other recommendation that came out of finance, which I may have already been acted on, I'm not quite certain, was that we make certain that we advertise not just in the paper of record for respondents. I think we also reached out to 5 individual firms that had expressed an interest, but that we advertise with the Municipal League to reach the widest audience that we can and get the widest variety of responses. And that said, we forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Mealy. Questions or comments from council? Hearing none? Oh,
She covered it.
yeah. Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, please, on the motion.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes. We'll move to item 9, resolution authorizing extension of professional contract agreements. Mrs. Frank in short form, please.
Resolution authorizing the extension of professional service agreements on a month-to-month basis.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
There's a motion and second. Welcome, Mr. Pavlak, again.
Good evening again. The resolution before you now is to approve month-to-month extensions for professional service agreements with Delta Development Group and Penn Strategies. With the expiration of agreements in November and January respectively, the administration believes that the extensions of the existing agreements is the best option, again, until proposals can be received, evaluated, and brought before council for approval. Similar to the prior resolution, this resolution extends the existing agreements under the current terms. However, these terms are now to be billed at an hourly rate for projects approved and directed by the mayor, not exceeding the monthly retainer included in the original agreements. Again, the mayor has contacted the current consultants regarding this resolution, and both have agreed to the extensions until the selection process is completed. We expect to advertise this agreement in March and hope to have something back to council in April or May. Following discussions with the Finance Committee, this resolution was brought forward to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Pavlak. Ms. Mealy, Finance.
This item was brought forward from the Finance Committee with a 2-1 positive recommendation. And our discussion centered primarily around what the RFP process for this particular, for these particular RFPs would look like through the administration. Mr. Yoder in particular requested, and I thought this was a wise request, that council be permitted to be involved in the development of the RFP if the RFP was not concluded, so that we could sort of have some involvement in both the construction of what we're looking to attain through consulting services, and then also, of course, the process that allows us to evaluate those applications for consulting services, or the proposals for consulting services, and choose the best one. There was some discussion about the most appropriate method for choosing consultants, and we did discuss the Brooks method that we utilized when we chose a new insurance consultant or insurance firm a few years ago, which allows you to evaluate the merits of the individual proposals without evaluating price. negotiate price when you've kind of chosen your top proposals. Those were all discussion items. Obviously, there was no determination made whatsoever in the finance meeting.
Right.
The only other, we had quite a lengthy discussion on this, so I'll defer to other members of the Finance Committee. I know that some items of concern for me were that in this agreement, as Mr. Pavlak mentioned, versus the prior agreement, we're continuing at the same monthly fee with the two firms that we contract with. That works out to about $8,333 monthly for Penn Strategies and $17,500 monthly for Delta Development. However, we're doing it at an hourly rate instead of a scope of services rate, as we're doing with our legal consultants, or with our legal firms. And what that means is it works out to about 33 hours monthly of Penn Strategies time and about 67 hours monthly of Delta's time. The Delta amount is more variable because we have different rates for different services they provide. And one of the items of concern for me was that we do require some services, particularly when it comes to grant administration from the two consultants that we work with. And I was a little concerned that the hourly strategy might leave us pushing back grant obligations or something like that from one calendar month to another, because there wouldn't be enough money in 1 month's services to accommodate everything that needs to be done. There's, of course, absolutely no way to know if that will happen. But it's worth pointing out that we're operating on now. These agreements are essentially different from the agreements that we had with these firms last year. So we'll have to evaluate that and see how it works out moving forward if we move forward. The secondary point I made, and Mr. Pavlak, you'll correct me if I was wrong about the amount that we budgeted for the 2020 year, but as you'll all recall, whether or not you voted on the budget last year, the Mayor Campana had removed all funding for a consultant from the city's budget in 2020, and council, in order to remove a tax increase that had been proposed by other members of the administration. And council acted to reinstate the tax increase and utilize some of that funding to replace some portion of the funding for a consultant. However, we put $75,000 back in the budget, not the $100,000 that we had spent for a consultant in calendar year 2019. That said, the ongoing month-to-month contracts with Penn Strategies in this case, because Delta Development was funded out of the RVT budget. The ongoing contract with Penn Strategies budgets us at an amount that would equal out to $100,000 for this year if Delta were to serve on a month-to-month basis through the entire year, which means that whatever portion of the year we use this contract under, we are depleting our consultant budget by an amount more than the monthly amount that we have budgeted for this year, leaving ourselves with less in the budget for a consultant when we do eventually move on an RFP. Am I right about that, Mr. Pavlak?
The amount was reduced in the general fund budget, that is correct, but the mayor and the administration believe and hope that by going with an hourly rate of projects that are approved under his watch, that we can save money until this process is reviewed, put out for RFP, and brought to council for future agreements.
Okay. Those are points that I'm putting out there that were items of concern for me with the strategy that we're employing. We did also, of course, have some talk about ongoing work that the city is, ongoing grants and funding that the city is either seeking or has obtained, and reporting requirements and things like that. It is difficult anytime you look at changing out services, but with our consultants, to a certain extent, we have a lot of balls in the air right now. So it will take some real skill and, if we do wind up changing consultants. But that said, as I said, Finance did forward this to the full body of council with a positive recommendation, and I'll defer to other members of the Finance Committee.
Thank you. Mrs. Katz.
I think we have to make it clear that people are probably wondering why we have two two different consultants. Delta is really works with more transportation and federal government. Penn Strategy is usually, it works with the state for grants and fundings. And the one thing that we were all concerned about is that both of these consultants are in the middle of a grant process for several different projects. And this can be very frightening in a way, because we don't want to lose any of these grants. With the hourly rate, I don't want to see the hands tied by either of the consultants. If anything does happen, if they're in the middle of something, and say 33 hours goes by with Penn Strategies, and they still have meetings with Harrisburg, I don't want to see that get stopped, and I hope we understand that, okay? Same thing with Delta. They're very involved with the Gateway Project, with Lord, I don't even remember how many grants have been involved with that one. Again, we don't want hands tied with an hourly rate. I think we have to keep that in our mind, that both these companies have worked many hours to get to where they are at this point, to accomplish what they're bringing forth to the city. And each one has done, you know, a really good job of everything. And I think the RFPs are going to be very interesting, and we're going to have to just watch where we go with this. And I do like what Adam did suggest, is that we do have somebody from council and people that are aware of what these grants entitle, and the entirety of these grants, because that's what they go after. The one thing that I think we all have to understand, these are companies that have, they have gone after their contacts for years. And if you don't have your contacts in Washington or Harrisburg, you get lost in the traffic as far as getting the money you need for your city. And both of these companies have worked very hard. Delta, I think, the first time I met Delta had to be about 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when they were talking about the Riverwalk. I mean, Delta has been working with the city for a long time. 35, 40 years at this point, if I look back at that. And then from what I understand, Penn Strategies, new kid on the block, about 6 years. And in the 6-year period, they've done a lot for us. They've, you know, they're busy working on Graffius Run. They are very much involved with the levee. They've done the parks programs and things like that. Delta, my goodness, what they've done and accomplished with transportation. I mean, we can go on and on what these companies have done. We don't want to lose these companies at times, so I'm hoping the RFPs come really good and strong. I think that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Mr. Pelizzi.
I just had a quick question for Ms. Mealy. Those figures you presented earlier for what the breakdown was for the consultants on the monthly basis, what were those again?
My understanding is, looking at the documentation provided to us from the administration in the back, that we are authorizing an ongoing amount, basically a monthly breakdown of both consultants' contracts with the city, $17,500 monthly for Delta and $8,333 monthly for Penn Strategies. And actually, to dovetail with that, because I meant to point this out, I know the city is currently we're currently administering about $20 million in grants that have been expended or are in the process of being expended, reporting, et cetera, and hopefully reimbursement. So, to give some idea of the scope of the projects we've got in play right now, that's a pretty hefty sum.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Okay, I don't have anything to add to that. I think they've succinctly described the situation. Mrs. Frank, on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelizzi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
I'm so sorry, no. I'm thinking of two things. I apologize, Ms. Frank, no.
No is your vote?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Motion passes 5-1. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move to item 10, resolution to approve the review of a fair application. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
Resolution to approve the review of a fair application for property located at 1646, 1648 Memorial Avenue.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Welcome, Mrs. Young.
Good evening. This resolution is for the review of a fair application. Fair applications aren't reviewed by City Council, but this particular application was submitted by a current City Council member. So the city solicitor recommended that in the interest of transparency, we receive approval to take the next steps in the review process. I would add that the application was submitted prior to the November 2019 election. The applicant is Becca Bode LLC, and the project is for the rehab of a 2-unit rental property located at 1646 and 1648 Memorial Avenue. It's in the designated Brodart neighborhood. The project meets all of the fair rental rehab program requirements, and Becca Bode has provided all of the necessary documentation to move forward with the project. The total construction cost is $24,852. Becca Bode will be responsible for $3,728, which is 15% of the total cost of the project, and the remainder of the cost will be provided by state fair funds in the amount of $21,124. Becca Bode previously received fair funds in the amount of $21,242 for the rental rehab of 1451 and 1453 Memorial Avenue. All of the work for this location was successfully completed in January 2019. We have no other pending applications for fair funds in the Brodart neighborhood. And if City Council approves proceeding with the application process, the city's loan review committee will review the application on February 14, and upon approval by the loan review committee, the application will be reviewed by the redevelopment authority on February 26th. This was reviewed by the finance committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Young.
And forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. The majority of our discussion actually did not center on this particular applicant. We agreed that this was a wise strategy given Mr. Palizzi's current service on City Council and being open and transparent about the entire affair. Mr. Palizzi, this is probably a moment in time when you want to say that you'll be abstaining on this item.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. But that said, most of our discussion actually revolved around the fact that within the Brodart neighborhood, how many rounds of fair funds have we had?
We received $400,000 of fair funds over a 2-year grant cycle. And we've completed 30 units so far.
And we have about $15,000 left in that fair allotment. Ms. Young says that given the speed with which we've been receiving applications recently, we have recently gotten a new allotment of fair funds that are going to be utilized in the Park Avenue neighborhood because we believe that we've more or less exhausted the market within the Brodart neighborhood currently. So our next round will be within Park Avenue.
Yeah, we received $200,000 for Park Avenue, and we hope to get some letters out to that neighborhood, just making them aware of the program.
Right. And is our, I believe, third PSA of the evening. Ms. Young, would you quickly go over for us the requirements for the program? We have two then fair funds rounds in circulation right now in the city. We have a historic fair, a set of historic fair funds, as well as a set of fair funds available in the park.
Yeah, we also have $200,000 for historic properties that are not located in the historic district, but they are on a list that was approved by council of historic properties. We've had some difficulty with that because there are income requirements. 30% of the funds, so 30% of the $200,000 have to go to households that are at 50% or lower of the area median income. And that changes depending on which year the grant funding comes in. This is strictly for rental properties, so an applicant would be a landlord, and that landlord would have to provide 15% of the total cost of the project. Projects can't exceed $25,000. So the fair funds would cover the remainder, 85% of the project.
And just to be clear, I believe the 50% of the area median income hovers around $33,000 annually
Right.
per household.
Yeah, for the Broad Art projects, that, I believe that was the area median income was around 33,000. So 30% of the funds had to be spent for those properties that had tenants in that income range.
Yeah, just to be clear, it doesn't need to be the property owner themselves, but it does
Right.
need to be
It's
the
the
tenant
tenants that
benefiting
have
from the
to meet
renovations.
those requirements. And then once you meet that 30%, you can go up to 200% of the area median income. But what we try to target that demographic at first, so we meet that fair requirement.
Yeah, so it's a little complex, all things considered, but the city does have a total of about a $400,000 grant pool for property renovations to rental properties in the city. And I think that any questions above and beyond that should be directed to the Community Development Department, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Mealy.
I miss PSA tonight.
Other comments or questions from council tonight?
I think we learned a lot, though, because knowing someone that's used these funds and how he's made such a tremendous accomplishment with his rentals. I mean, what he said he's been able to do with this money has been really good, and hopefully this will happen with the Park Avenue people at this point, because it is amazing.
I would like to just jump in and say that it's a great program, and hearing you say that there's a lot more applicants going for it, it's to me it's exciting, and it's good to see that there's more people that want to take advantage of this program, because it really does make a difference and help develop those areas. So I love it.
It is helpful. Mrs. Young, can you, for the public, explain where the fair money comes from?
We have to apply directly to Lycoming County for the funding. So Lycoming County is a pass-through. They're actually an applicant to the state. Their Act 13 dollars that were a result of some of the gas well activity, and it's specifically for housing, specifically for affordable housing. And it was a result of sort of the housing crisis that came about when the Marcellus shale business was very active, and rents were high, and people needed affordable housing, and so that's how the program got started.
Thank you, Mrs. Young, because we want the public to know that it's money designated for specific needs. It can't be used just anywhere. It can't be applied for just anything. It's for housing in those kinds of areas designated, and it's gas money, so it's getting put to good use. I think we're ready for the vote, Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Yoder.
Abstain.
Mr. Mackey.
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi.
Abstain.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Ms. Mealy.
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes. 4-0 and 2 abstentions. We'll move to item 12, resolution authorizing submission of a Green Light Go application. Mrs. Frank, short form, please.
Resolution authorizing submission of a Green Light Go application.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Mr. Winder, welcome tonight.
Good evening. Before you is a resolution authorizing the submission of a Green Light Go application. Green Light Go application would be used for the upgrades to the intersections of Mulberry Street and 4th Street, 3rd Street and Market Street, pending the two-way traffic conversion. Involved in the upgrades would be signal upgrades along with crosswalks, curbing, ADA compliance, preemption for fire department, pedestrian push buttons, LED countdown, pedestrian signals. The Green Light Go grant would provide the city with $792,937.44. It would require a 20% match of $198,234.36. I know there was a lot of discussion at the finance meeting about the matching source. We
We're looking at liquid fuels as well as general fund. Mr. Pavlak has made a determination that there's other funding sources available at this time. And if you have any questions on that, I defer to him. This was reviewed by Finance and passed on with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Winder. And Finance again.
I'm really sorry if I'm talking too much tonight, guys.
Don't
Yes.
stop now. Just one more.
This was reviewed by Finance and forwarded with a positive recommendation. A lot of our discussion did revolve around the match. As I think members of council and probably the public are well aware, we have a project with a lot of moving parts on East Third Street. We had received a pretty exceptional amount of matching funding from a variety of local sources, but part of what we're attempting to determine moving forward is exactly how much of that matching funding remains, if any, for this grant, and to what extent we have to find the matching funding within city government somewhere or another, whether it's general fund, whether it's liquid fuels, whether it's whatever Mr. Pavlak has up his sleeve over there. Regardless, obviously, it's a 25% match, more or less, or 20% match, excuse me, on a project that will bring us two new signals and two new intersections, which doesn't seem like a lot, but they're really expensive. And we did confirm with Mr. Winder, one of the signals that we're planning to update with this grant funding, should we receive it, is the signal at Market and Third, which is currently set up for one-way traffic on Third Street and might potentially need to be revised for two-way traffic. If we do not receive the go-ahead from PennDOT on the two-way traffic at that intersection, then that money could be moved to another intersection where we need a new signal. The intersection at Market and Third is frankly meets all of these standards except for the fact that it's not two-way. So we would not do any work on that intersection unless we needed to make it a two-way intersection. And yeah, the rest of our discussion simply revolved around an updated funding matrix for East Third and trying to get a fix on exactly where, what money has gone where and what we've spent and what we've been reimbursed for. The administration is hard at work on providing that to us here in the next little bit. Okay.
Thank you, Councilwoman Mealy. Mrs. Katz.
One of the things that we did learn is how antiquated some of our stoplights are.
Yes.
And some of them are from the 70s?
70s, yes, ma'am.
70s and 80s, which it was interesting to also learn how everything connects, and you can't not just replace one stoplight at the end of town. It has to connect with all the others, and people don't understand that. But we also have to understand that, like we keep on saying, a lot of our infrastructure is old, and we do have to work on trying to get funding put together to replace some of these things. As you, Mr. Winder, said, you would like to see this eventually go west.
Yes.
So we can start improving some of our stoplights, which affects your crosswalks and everything else. As we can see how much money this costs just for two separate areas, how much this will cost to do throughout the city. So this is one of the areas, another area that we have to work on our infrastructure that has been neglected for so long. Thank goodness we do have the Green Light Glow grant. This is what, 3 or 4 years old at this point?
Yes.
It's not that old.
No.
But thankfully we did find this grant, and that we can utilize this, and maybe we could go after some other funding to work on our stoplights and everything, because it is, as we can see, it's starting to fail.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Mr. Yoder.
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions noted down from our discussion in finance this week, and you kind of alluded to one of them. We were talking about kind of clarifying where that match was going to come from. Can either of you or Mr. Pavlak speak to what you've dug up the past couple of days?
What we've done is the prior year street projects in the Act 13 fund, after closing those out and the residual amount of money, we do have the money there to cover. So we have enough to cover $200,000 in matching funds, and enough with that to complete the 2019 street project, which was advertised and has come back, and have some residual funds in case anything else occurs.
Okay. My second question, I had a note about this, and I don't know if we really hit on this in finance. Who's going to be administering this from our end?
At this point, myself, I'll be working with Delta, pending we hire a new engineer.
Are you going to have the bandwidth to do it?
Yes.
Okay. That's all my questions.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
No, I mean, yes, I'm sorry.
Yes?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Motion passes 6-0. Thank you, Mrs. Frank. We'll move to item 13, resolution authorizing the purchase of a tractor. In short form, please, Mrs. Frank.
A resolution authorizing the purchase of a 2020 John Deere compact utility tractor.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. Mr. Winder?
As you're all aware, we're in that trend where streets and parks equipment is getting very antiquated. This resolution is for a 2020 John Deere 4066R compact utility tractor. This tractor would be replacing a 2002 John Deere 5320, also including a front bucket and a set of wing mowers. The John Deere tractor is used for mowing roughly 200 acres of municipal parks. We also use it for our hazardous tree program when it comes to grinding stumps. We utilize the tractor to clean the stump debris up. We use it for tree planting. We use it for snow removal. It is a very diversified machine. It is not the oldest one in the fleet, but it's the most troublesome one. We've had issues with it for the past 8 years, and it does actually have the most hours on it, with 7,908 hours. The funding for this was put in the budget and approved. The purchase price of the tractor is $48,550.63. That does include all new attachments for the tractor and a trade allowance of $17,300 for the 2002 John Deere. This was reviewed by Finance and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Winder. Let's start with Public Works, and we'll work our way this way.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Yeah.
Okay. We all knew this one was coming to us for quite a while. As Ms. Mealy said, she caught you guys pounding out on it at one point and couldn't get it started. This does have a 3-year warranty, from what I understand. For some people that don't realize, it is also used to mow 200 acres of grass throughout the city, which is a lot of mowing constantly, which will be starting not too far off in the future here. Like we said, a lot of our equipment and infrastructure, we've got to start maintaining and buying new at this point, because I know you work very hard on trying to keep the bits and pieces together, whether it's with tape, glue, or whatever, but you do an excellent job at trying to do that, but there comes a time when it can't be done anymore. So it was passed on to a full body of council with a positive recommendation for a piece of equipment that's much needed.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz. And Finance.
Finance also passes on with a positive recommendation. Mrs. Katz pretty well covered it. The only question, I think, moving forward, Mr. Winder says that it's exceptionally helpful if we maintain a fleet that's predominantly John Deere, because it means that the number of parts we have to have in stock is significantly lower. And it seems as though this is kind of an outlier vehicle. The one that we have, the John Deere that we have that is older than this, functions better. But we did say that there must be something worthy about the vehicle, since we got a trade-in of $17,300 for it. So anyway, it's not a terrible thing. And I did, at one point, Ms. Katz is right, have to give a member of the Streets and Parks Department a ride home when this particular mower broke down at Low School Park. So I'm glad to see it leaving the fleet so that our employees don't get stranded. But We forwarded it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Councilman Bailey. Other questions or comments from council members? How many tractors do we have?
3 full-size tractors, 1 in the flood control department, 2 in the parks department, and then we have 4 mid-sized tractors, I'll call them. They're the ones that you see with the mowers in the front of them. 2 in flood control, which are equipped, specialized just for the incline of the hill, and then 2 for the parks department to do all of the fine mowing, trim mowing, things of that nature.
Right. And the last previous 2 years, 2018 and 2019, there was a lot of extra mowing to do because the
extra
grass
rain
went late into the year. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions, comments? If not, Mrs. Frank, on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes. Motion passes 6-0. Item 14, resolution on the 2019 state fire grant. In short form, please.
Resolution 2019 State Fire Grant.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Welcome, Chief Ekman.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. President Allison, members of council, tonight before you, we have a resolution to accept the 2019 Office of the State Fire Commissioner's State Fire Grant. This is an annual grant that comes out every year. It is a competitive grant. The City of Williamsport Bureau of Fire is competing with every other fire and EMS organization within the state. Meeting the requirements, we were awarded the grant this year. The maximum amount that we can receive is up to $15,000. And as we can see in the grant tonight, we were awarded $14,248.03. And also, as we went through and discussed this during Public Works, the funding coming through the state grant is using to make the payment, the yearly lease payment on our new command vehicle that was purchased last year. That monthly or that yearly payments are $16,004.06. The offset monies will already, which is budgeted, will come out of the support equipment line item. And it went through Public Works, the positive recommendation, and it is now before you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief Ekman.
I
Mrs.
think we
Katz.
have to be really proud of our fire department to be able to go after this grant, number one, but also to get almost the full 15,000, which is incredible. When, how many did you say? It's for everybody in the state that applies for it.
Yeah, I think, I'm not quite sure the total number they budget at the state level. I was told about 30 million. So you do the math, 2,000 departments, there you go, at 15,000, so.
Which is fantastic. It
Yes.
really is. You do a good job with this all the time, and like you said, it offsets the cost of the vehicle that you also needed for your department. And this is, a grant that you keep on going after, and let's hope that the results are the same
And
for
we will
next
keep
year.
digging,
Yes.
as we always do.
I know, you go after a lot of grants, which is fantastic, and we thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah, thank you,
And
very
this is
welcome.
no, as you also said, there's no match to this. This is just a grant out and out, no matches
No match.
whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Questions or comments from council? Everything she said, we approve. No other comments, Mrs. Frank, on the motion, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Thank you,
Mrs.
Steve.
Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Frank, and motion passes. We'll move to item 16, HARB Certificates of Appropriateness, and we all have the list. 326, 328 Locust Street, D&J Realty is going to do quite a bit of work on the porch and steps and other things like that. Item 3, Joe's Pizza, 963, 965, 967 West 3rd Street. Going to do some work on a wooden sign and a metal plexiglass sign change and some other painting and various things. And we only have those two. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion and a second. Discussion on any of these items from council? Hearing none on the motion, Mrs. Frank?
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes. The next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be held Thursday, February 20th, 2020 at 7:30 PM. Okay, item 17, thank you. Except for filing Finance Committee meetings, minutes of 9/24/19, Controller's Report, December 2019, Williamsport Municipal Water Authority, and Sanitary Authority minutes of 12/18/19. Is there a motion on that?
Second.
Comments or questions? None. Mrs. Frank, please.
Mr. Yoder?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Frank. Motion passes 6-0. Next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be Thursday, February 20th, 2020 at 7:30 PM at the Trade and Transit 2 Center, 144 West 3rd Street, 3rd floor in Williamsport, PA. Upcoming meetings, Monday, February 10th at noon, Planning Commission, 4 PM, Recreation Commission. Wednesday, February 12th, 3:30 PM, O&E Pension Board. Friday, February 14th, 11 AM, ERC meeting. Tuesday, February 18th, 11:30 AM, Public Safety meeting. 1 PM, Finance meeting. 2:30 PM, Public Works meeting. 6:30 PM, HARB. Thursday, February 20th, 10:30 PM? AM.
Those are some hard-working
Yeah.
zoning hearing board
You
members.
never know what works for people, though. 10:30 AM zoning hearing, Trade and Transit Sue, 4 PM Board of Health, and our city council meeting. Some of these committee meetings may or may not have business. That'll be determined this week, I assume. So that concludes our regular agenda. Are there comments from council members? Mr. Yoder?
Yeah, so real quick, we were talking about during our appointments and reappointments, how the redevelopment authority is an under-leveraged authority. I was fortunate to go tonight to Penn College's welding expansion dedication, which we were all invited to, and they're an amazing asset for the city, but I would argue an underutilized asset for the city. As we talk about redevelopment, economic revitalization in the city, I think there is substantial opportunity. I'm hoping we can work together with them to leverage that asset to our advantage to help promote economic growth and what have you. So they have an amazing facility. I'm excited to see what they continue to do, and we should certainly sit here and support them as much as we can.
Hear, hear. Other comments or questions from council tonight? Hearing none, comments from the administration tonight?
Just that our first canine officer is back and is starting to get acclimated with the dog tomorrow night. So they'll be ready to go very soon.
Yeah. Are there comments from the public?
Also, I'll just say thank
Oh,
you
I'm
to
sorry.
Councilwoman Katz and Sioka and many others for that process.
Yes.
Getting that initially started, and now it's coming to fruition, so
Yeah.
thank you.
It's one time when we're glad to say the city's gone to the dogs, so. Comments from the public? Ma'am, I'm sorry, could,
Cruiser blocking the accessible parking out here, and I don't know if that's something that's common, or if that's policy, if that's something that you find acceptable. There's no way with that vehicle there, that a person will be able to access the accessible spot with the cruiser park there. That would be good. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the public tonight? Yes, sir. Please go to the podium and give your name and home address.
Good evening, council members. My name is Chris Bassers. I'm 29 Ross Street in Williamsport. I'm a volunteer with Fair Districts of Pennsylvania, a nonpartisan organization trying to end gerrymandering in Pennsylvania. Fair Districts endorses the creation of an independent citizens commission to redraw the congressional and legislative districts following the 2020 census. In trying to improve public awareness and politicians' awareness of public support, Fair Districts has approached local governments and asked them to pass a resolution that would endorse the creation of an independent citizens commission. The resolution is non-binding and does not support any specific legislation. Currently, 355 governing bodies in Pennsylvania have signed this resolution, including cities of Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Altoona, Harrisburg, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. Lock Haven and State College have also passed resolutions. By endorsing this resolution, local leaders show their support for impartial, fair, and transparent redistricting, which in turn encourages all levels of government to do the same. Tonight, I'm requesting that the members of the Williamsport City Council review and endorse this resolution. Thank you for your time. And then
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, you may.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, here, we'll leave it on there for Jake. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Speaking of the census. Said speaking of the census.
Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor, and friends. That was not scripted by any means, okay? Just happenstance that we're talking about fair census redistricting, and I am census. So it's been 4 months since I've been through with the resolution. I want to bring you up to date on a couple things. And first off, my apologies for the extensive lack of communication in that time period. Because as soon as we did the resolution and adoption in September roughly, we had a member of our partnership group resign in the 5 central Susquehanna counties, Montour, Columbia, Union, Snyder, and Northumberland. I ended up covering down there, and then shortly after that, I ended up in Bradford, Wyoming, and Susquehanna. So from pretty much September until the end of calendar 19, I had about pretty much a quarter of the Commonwealth. Yeah, a lot of miles, a lot of time, and a lot of distance, but that has changed. I am now back to focusing on Lycoming, Sullivan, Tioga, and probably a little bit of Clinton now too. Just some other things happened the last day or so. But I wanted to bring you up to date on where things are, and for the public edification, what's going to happen. In the month of February that we're in right now, we are beginning the group quarters process. The group quarters enumeration would count therefore Penn College, Lycoming College, the nursing homes in the city, and any other group quarter facility. This also includes SBE, service-based enumerations, which would be facilities like American Rescue Workers, Grace Center, Salvation Army, YMYWCAs, the places that host shelters in emergency situations. All of this is confidential. Okay, so what is being asked by Title 13 code is permanently secured. I am sworn for life, as is any census worker, not to divulge any such information. Back in September, I was very unsure what the actions of both Lycoming College and Penn College were going to be. I am pleased and proud to say that they are both completely on board. The student activities directors, the deans of the college have taken initiatives to make sure that their group quarter situations will be counted, will be enumerated in a couple of different fashions. Number one fashion is the old paper and pencil, fill in the blanks, send it back. Number two, which is more technologically available, that is of using a cell phone and or a landline. Number three, which we think most of the students are going to do, is simply using internet. or the college, if they deem and when they start talking to group quarters enumerators, they can also do it basically by a data dump. They're going to accumulate the information, put it on a flash drive, give it to the census worker as they come through in the next 60 days or so. So hopefully, I can knock on wood and say this, that the Tract 8, which is Penn College zone, basically Van Kampen to Brodart, which has a 34.7% non-response rate, should go down, which means the population of the city should go up, which affects representation, which affects all the budgets and monies that we've been talking about all through the course of the day. It's a win-win. Other point that we're up to is recruiting for the city. In Lycoming County, the goal is 1,400 individuals. Right now, as we speak, there are about 650 folks that have made application and been accepted and brought on to the beginning of the enumeration process. Wages are a big thing. It is $17.50 an hour with a 20-hour-ish work week based on the individual's flexibility. Mileage is additional at the federal rate, which is 58 cents a mile. Most of the folks in Lycoming County will stay in Lycoming County. Okay? There is also a 3-day training period that goes along with this, and they are also paid days. Now, this is a short-term part-time position, so whenever anybody applies, they will simply go to the federal government census website, 2020census.gov/jobs. The application takes about 15 minutes, and from what I've been hearing from folks, there's about a 2-week to 3-week lag time when the information gets processed and somebody actually calls back to verify that, in fact, you're interested and we move forward. Okay? With 650 people in the pool, that still leaves over 650 to be needed. Pretty much through the end of the month is when the application cycle is going to wind down. So for those watching the informative basis, it's needed. We need to become civically engaged. Okay? It also is good money. I pitched my son the same thing. He's from Florida, in Florida right now, and basically from his point of view, at the federal rate down there, which is 25-ish an hour, he could pay off his car in about 3 months. So there's positives in everything. The one thing that I had emailed the mayor and yourself, Mr. President, earlier today were a couple of grant application processes that are potentially available. One is through Pennsylvania Government /Census, and the other is through DCEP. Now, I offer that as information, can't do anything to help you, but both applications are due in the next week, January or February 14th. Each one carries about a $50,000 max allocation. Okay? I know Tioga County, which I also deal with, has made application for that. They are hoping to get the entire 50, but the budget from the Pennsylvania State Complete Count Commission has about a $6 million budget that they're going to distribute between February 14 and the end of the month. So with that in mind, I would encourage it and hope that action can be taken on behalf of the citizenry of the city. In terms of action, what I think would be advisable for the city to do, and Mr. Mayor and I have talked about this last week, we'll get into it again next week. In terms of public and social media, the more social media that is out there, the more people understand, the more informative of the process. This census is only 9 questions, and that's it. It is not the old 2000 census that took us all an hour and a half. It is not the 2020 census or the 2010 census that took, it's only 25 questions. This is 9. I have copy right here. Okay? So it asks nothing invasive. It can be done in 5 minutes and can be done in the privacy of one's home. So the enumerators, really, if we do it well, won't have much to do. That's the hope. Okay? But anyway, I would think that a link on the city website and/or the Facebook pages would be appropriate, because those things people link off to. And if we all go back to the 1970s, where it was the Brex commercial, you tell two friends and they tell two friends and they tell two friends, that's the mode that we're into right now. As I said, Mr. Mayor and I are beginning some biweekly meetings, and the last thing that I would suggest, as I just did, is to make sure that the grant application is processed, put in, best foot forward, and hope we move something forward. Okay, so the other side of it is, when does all this start? That's the biggest question. Census mailing will begin March 16 to 20. That is when we, Joe Q Public, will see the first mailings. It will be an invitation. Inside the mailing envelope, you will see one of the three modes to respond with instructions to complete the census. Again, 9 questions, 5 minutes. If one does it online, and if one does it via telephone, you will get a confirmation number, just like we pay PP&L or something like that. Right? So that will be the identification that, yes, you have done it. Nobody's going to come knocking again. Okay? That's it for tonight. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Questions from anybody, audience or not?
Question.
Sure.
Qualifications.
For the enumerator job, be 18 years old and a U.S. citizen. That's it. There is a background check, and I honestly do not know the degree of that. I've had that question asked, and I have not been able to follow up with that, because once it gets into the process, it's out of anybody's control, with the exception of, you know, the entire background check process. So.
Because I know some people that would like to, but they have a criminal record, and it's, you know, like I said, it's not.
Right.
There's certain guidelines for.
Suggestion that I've always heard is put the name in, do the application, see what happens. It never hurts to make the effort, make the endeavor. 15 minutes online to do it. You know, if you do the math very simply, 20 hours a week and $17 an hour, you're looking pushing $400 a week. Okay. There are waivers, I will say this, also for Section 8 housing and also for SSI. So those folks who are Social Security dependent and or elderly retired, it does not affect their income cap. That's a good thing. Pennsylvania is one of 4 states that offers that.
Great.
Another question.
Sure.
Do you have a special group that will go into, let's say, like the nursing facilities?
There will be some training. That's one of those 3 days of training to do the group quarters. Again, that's outside my scope. All I can say is, yes, that's one of the hiring of the enumerators, that they will get some specialized training to work with group quarters. But again, group quarters have a couple of options on how they will be able to enumerate and count their specific population. Well, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look forward to hearing more and working on that. I need to announce we're going to have an executive session on legal matters after the adjournment of tonight's meeting. Are there any other comments from the public tonight? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.